internet friends, and welcome back to another episode of Go Ask Alice, the show where we jump down random internet rabbit holes and bring you wonderful factoids from our adventures in Wiki Wonderland. I'm Drew, and I didn't think of something to say in this moment.
Oh.
But with me is...
I'm Lindsay, and I've eaten too many cookies.
I'm Sarah, and I just bought a new plant called Gobbleguts.
Gobbleguts, I like it.
Gobbleguts. Yeah, he's the other.
Ew. This is the show where we jump down random internet rabbit holes. We all start on the same wiki page every week, and we use hyperlinks within the article to click around until we find something that we cannot stop reading. Typically, this means two or more paragraphs. Sheesh.
Sheesh.
This week, we started on the moon, and
Physically.
I actually have no idea where you guys... Normally we give each other like a little teaser. I have no idea where you guys are right now.
I took a wild ride, and I ended up on Henrietta Lacks, or HeLa cells, which I'm sure Drew knows all about.
Oh my God. Also, wait, Lindsay, you don't know about the... Because we had to read the book on her for Colgate.
Drew, I'm really sorry. I not only dodged that, but I have your copy that you gave me, and I've used it to collage so many different works of art.
What, did you just rip pages out of it and collage shit?
Yes.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Oh, that's beautiful.
That is amazing.
Beautiful.
Oh, Lord.
Holy
Okay.
shit. No, that's good. That's good. I ended up on antimicrobial resistance.
Ooh,
Damn, you guys
very.
went so scientific.
Ooh, did you not?
we did. Yeah, what did you land on?
The history of pieing people in the face.
Oh my God.
I love that. I love it.
Oh, that is amazing. I love it. I'm very excited to hear about that history. Maybe should we do a little science sandwich?
I was thinking that, or would it make sense? Yeah, you know what? Let's not just overload everybody with like science, and then suddenly pie.
Pie.
Maybe a little science pie makes sense. We'll do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, before we dive into all of our amazing topics, we have to start with question of the week. And this week's question was, what type of food did you only discover as an adult that you just can't get enough of now? Lindsay, what is your food item?
Kind of embarrassingly, I didn't know that garlic salt existed, and I love garlic in everything. So,
Oh my
yeah,
God.
now I use garlic salt instead of regular salt every time I use salt.
I think that's the
Wow.
only way to
That's,
use salt is garlic salt.
I never knew this. I learned this like within the last 4 years.
Wow, you went so long without
Wow.
it. What about you, Drew?
Well, this is actually, in the time I've been doing the show, I've discovered this. Cheese. Cheese is my new favorite thing in the world.
Really?
Oh.
I'm so proud of you.
I used to absolutely detest cheese. And now I can't live without it. Like, everything has to have cheese on it. And I can eat like cheese just by itself.
Yes, that's the level of cheese love that I admire in people, is the people who want to just grab a fistful of cheese and put it in their mouth. That's definitely me.
Yeah, I could never do that until this year. I think it was this year. I guess it was like this. I don't know. Time's weird. COVID's fucked with my brain.
I am so proud of you. That is a big step.
Thank you. I appreciate that. What about you, Sarah? What's your food?
So mine is coriander, but I think you call it cilantro.
Oh.
Do you hate it, Lindsay?
You like cilantro?
Okay, here is...
I really hate it.
So I hated it too. I hated it with a passion until we started getting these like meal prep delivery kits. Marley Spoon. I don't know if you have it in the state. But yeah, so you get all of the ingredients in the recipe and you just cook it up. And a lot of it had coriander or cilantro in it. And at first, me and Simon were like, ew, gross. But we're like, no, we should trust the recipe. We'll put it in. And it's delicious. Like when it's used in the right way in the recipes, it's really, really good. And we both like it. So maybe I feel like I was just using it wrong beforehand and I judged it too quickly. Lindsay's like, no, you're wrong.
I don't know about that one.
I have that gene that makes you hate cilantro.
You're a super taster. Yeah.
Oh, makes it taste like my mom's.
It's
like
genetic.
That. It tastes like soap.
Yes.
I've said this every time people ask me. I would rather eat soap than eat cilantro.
Wow.
And yes, I've gotten soap in my mouth. I do know what I'm saying. I would rather eat soap than eat cilantro. It's disgusting.
Wow, you must be a real super taster then.
Yeah, that's my Tinder profile.
I'm a real super taster.
I'm a super taster.
But we have a ton of audience submissions that actually are none of what we have said.
Really?
Yeah, I could not bring myself to cut out anybody's submissions, so I'm going to say them rapid fire, and you guys hold your applause till the end, just like Drew said.
Okay.
Hold it in.
Holding it.
We've got The Blood of My Enemies, Melinda's Black Truffle Hot Sauce, Sauerkraut, Polish Garlic Sauce, Horseradish, Habanero Hot Sauce and Raw Jalapenos, Garlic Aioli, Horseradish again, Capers, and Green Ketchup.
Wow. Our audience has a taste.
I think these are like, I love that horseradish is like the epitome of like grown up gross food, like to the point where I'm like intrigued to try it because multiple people said that they love it on everything, but I'm still in that frame of mind that's like, horseradish is disgusting. Like grown ups eat that. That's gross.
It's gross. Get it out.
I can't picture what horseradish even looks like.
I will agree with Fun Fact Science, also great username. Capers are awesome to put in everything. That's something I've also started doing as an adult. Particularly, I make like a vegan tuna salad and I put capers in it and it is fantastic.
What is a caper?
I don't know if it's from both Greece and Italy. I think it's probably just grown in the Mediterranean, and it's basically a bud of a plant. Like it would flower, but you harvest them when they're buds, and they have like a very sour sort of taste or acidic kind of. It's funny, like I think that this is the adult palate. I think that all of these things have like a slightly acidic taste to them.
Yeah. How bizarre that we're all like, yes, we would like a little bit. Something that's a little bit gross.
Yeah, I think that's like part of growing up. I'm like intrigued to try sauerkraut. That was from Steve. Thanks, Steve.
Oh, Steve.
Steve loves sauerkraut, everyone.
He loves sauerkraut.
Steve.
Steve.
Anyway, which science should go first?
I'm happy to do HeLa cells because I feel like Henrietta Lacks deserves all the attention.
Okay. So
I landed on HeLa cells, and Drew, you read a book about this, and you would know it just from like your general awesomeness of being a biologist. But Lindsay, do you know anything about HeLa cells?
I know from the title of the book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, that they, being scientists, use her cells all the time.
Yeah, exactly right. Yes.
Okay.
So I will, you know, you're totally right. So her cells were basically, like, long story short, they're a type of cancer cell that she had growing in her body, and they found out that they are these type of immortal cells where they reproduce and repopulate really easily on plates and in test tubes, basically. So you can just repropagate them and have this immortal cell line. So it means that scientifically, when you're doing research and testing things, you can do tests on the same cells, so you're not introducing any other type of accidental biases or other things that you might not foresee. So they're incredibly important in science, but I thought I would break it down and give you a little bit about her life, because I feel like not a lot of people know about her life. So as I said, HeLa cells are particularly well known in scientific research. But the history of exactly how they become so well known and so well used, I thought was really fascinating. And, you know, it's both fascinating, shocking, and I wrote an all-round just reflection of the type of world we live in.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
So hold on to your butts, because we're gonna go on a wild ride. Are you ready?
Right. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so before we really dive into what makes these cells special, we have to go back in time and follow the life of a young African-American woman called Henrietta Lacks. So she was born in the year 1920, and she was born in Roanoke, Virginia, which throwback to our episode where I chatted about the lost colony of Roanoke.
Wow. It's the same Roanoke, huh?
Wow.
Yeah, the same Roanoke. Anyone who's interested, you can listen to episode 17, episode 17.
Oh my God, but pause. Do you think that there could be a veritable conspiracy theory that there's some kind of like energetic epicenter at Roanoke? Like, I feel like someone's invented this already.
Oh my God. I am sure that there's a forum on the internet with just that theory.
Sorry, do continue.
All right, so we're in Roanoke. Henrietta had a relatively normal life for the first few years of her life until age 4. At age 4, her mother died suddenly, unfortunately, giving birth to her 10th child.
Wow.
So after this, as you can imagine, life was really, really hard, and her father could not manage all of the different children, trying to provide from them, and you know, it was just very, very difficult. And so to be able to help provide for his children and give them a more stable life, he moved the entire family to be raised and live among other relatives. So Henrietta ended up with her maternal grandfather, and they lived in a 2-story log cabin on this patch of land that they owned. But what I thought was fascinating and also just heartbreaking was that this log cabin was once the slave quarters on the plantation. Wow. That had been owned by Henrietta's white great-great-grandfather and great-uncle.
We are covering a lot of U.S. history. Like, this is amazing that it's like hitting all the major points. We've got Roanoke, we've got like slavery, we've got, well, we're gonna have science. Like, already this is the whole gambit.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And when I read that fact, I was like, oh geez, that like really highlights that slavery was not that long ago, because it was her great-great-grandfather had owned that plantation. And it's like, that is only a couple generations away from her. And just, imagine trying to, you can imagine growing up there and being so close to the history of your relatives. So I'm sure it definitely had an impact on her and her family. So from an early age, to help support the family, she worked as a tobacco farmer. And so that involved anything from tending to the gardens, helping feed and tend to the animals, and generally just helping support her family. And so this actually took quite a toll on her. She ended up leaving school to continue to help support the family financially and physically with all of the workload. So when she was 14 years old, she gave birth to her very first child. And a couple years later, her and her... 14 years old, so very young.
Oh my God.
Remember, this would have been in 1934. So it was, not uncommon for women to have children before that, like multiple children before the age of 20.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So she was 14. A couple of years later, her and then her now husband moved from Virginia to Maryland. And her husband was called David, or they would nickname him Day. And so they moved so he could work at a steelworks to try provide a more stable future for them and their future children. So things were looking up. So she would have been about 16, 17. She had a toddler. She was married. They had just moved away to like a new job in a new hometown where things were looking up. However, this was smack bang pretty much when World War II was just starting out. And Day was called and enlisted to fight in World War II.
Oh my God. So she's like 16 years old with 2 kids?
I think at this time she only had one child.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay.
But she did have multiple children, so there's possible that she might have even had a newborn by the time that he was taken
Oh my God,
to be enlisted in the war. Mm-hmm. I know, so you moved away from your family, super stressful already because you don't have your support network, and your husband has just been yanked off to the war. So, yeah, I'm sure incredibly stressful. So I wrote stressful time all round, but it did get better. He did come back from the war, thankfully, and they had more children, and they were able to, over the next decade, work and bought their very first house, and, you know, they were having a fairly good life with their children. They now had a home, and she was now entering her early 30s. However, I've written that fate is a cruel bitch, and Henrietta was actually really, really unwell for the last few years of her life. And the last pregnant she had, so her final child she had called Joseph, she was incredibly unwell, and I'll get to it a little bit later, but basically she was unwell even before conceiving Joseph, with pains in her lower abdomen. And once she had found out that she was pregnant, all of her friends, family, and herself had chopped it down to those pains must have just been the early signs of pregnancy.
Right, that makes sense.
Which we now, yeah. So only 4 months after giving birth to Joseph, the pain continued and was getting very severe. And so she presented at Johns Hopkins Hospital really, really unwell. And I think it's super important to note here that at the time, so where she was living around Baltimore, I believe it was, Johns Hopkins University Hospital was the only one in the entire city limits that would treat Black patients and do it either for free or for subsidized prices.
Wow.
Yes, many of the other hospitals just would not treat Black people, or they were incredibly expensive.
Oh my God, that's so fucked. I feel like that's an
that's really fucked.
Aspect of like history, or I guess particularly the history of racism, that like I actually didn't know until this moment. Like, you know, obviously like I knew people have been like racist and what have you, but like I didn't realize that was like one of the ways it manifested was just straight up, we won't treat Black patients. That's incredibly awful.
Yeah. And we'll find out a little bit later is that even when they did treat Black patients, they would often use them or their bodily samples for scientific research without their consent as well. So it was really like, yes, we'll treat you, but there was kind of like this underlying...
There's a catch.
Yeah, exactly. So it wasn't just, we're going to treat you because you're a human and you deserve medical treatment. They could get something out of it, which is just evil. But yeah, so she rocks up at Johns Hopkins, and she's in incredible amounts of pain, and she tries to describe this pain to the doctor as feeling like a knot in her womb. And I can imagine it would have been, so for any of our listeners who have experienced like cramps from having like a uterus and ovaries doing their things, it can feel kind of bizarre depending on what type of cramps you get. And I think her trying to describe it as like a knot was a really good way of trying to describe that. Just it was feeling not right, something was not right, and incredibly tight and not normal. So I think she did a good job of trying to describe her pain. And so this is the same knot that she had previously told her cousins about just before she had fallen pregnant. And everyone had just assumed that when she started presenting as pregnant, that the knot was just associated with that pregnancy, that it was part of the pregnancy process, and it wasn't anything to do externally in her body. However, at Johns Hopkins, they began to take biopsies of her cervix, and they found a very large mass on her cervix. So she was diagnosed with cancer, and she was treated, but unfortunately, at that stage, late stage in the cancer, and with the treatment that was available, it wasn't enough, and her illness continued to just worsen and worsen. So during this time, she had presented back at the hospital, and when she had presented back, they had taken more samples of her cervix that were taken without her permission or even her knowledge. There was no consent or permission to say, yes, you can take these samples. So the first one, apparently there was verbal consent that, to help diagnose you, we need to take a sample. But these subsequent ones, there was no written verbal permission or understanding or consent. And it was these samples that were taken that were given to cancer research George Oat Gray. And we'll get back to this in a bit, but just remember that these samples have been taken, given to George in his lab, and basically were given to him to try experiment on to see if they can try to determine what type of cells were growing.
Okay.
Because this is back in the early days where cancer was less well understood, and they kind of understood that there were different types of cancers, but they were still trying to determine exactly what cancer was what and how they progressed through the body. So Henrietta, she kept getting worse and worse, and she sadly passed away in October in 1951, and she was just 31 years old. So she was a very young woman.
Poor girl.
Yeah. She was buried in an unmarked grave in the family cemetery on that original plantation that her great-great-grandfather had owned. And to this day, her exact burial location is unknown, but people think it's near her mother's grave. And her mother's grave was one of the only graves at the time to be marked with a tombstone.
Was that on purpose? Why was it unmarked?
I think for cost reasons, because tombstones are really expensive.
Yeah. Oh my god.
Yeah. So a lot of her family's graves were unmarked at the time.
Okay.
So we're going to jump back to George in his lab. So he's gotten these cells that were taken without her permission, and he starts experimenting with them before her death. So she was still alive. They could have asked for consent at this stage with what research they were doing. So he began to culture them up, and this is typical in cell research. You try to culture them to see if you can propagate the cells. So can they reproduce on their own? Do they need extra energy sources? Just to try get an understanding of what type of cells they are. And he was super duper surprised when all of a sudden these cells were growing super robustly. So they were doubling their culture size every 24 hours.
Oh my god.
And this was completely unlike any other human tissue species and specimens that he had ever worked with before.
Had he worked with other cancer cells? Like, this was not typical of cancer cells?
Exactly, yeah. So he had worked extensively with lots of other cancer cells. And this was just a very special type. And it's the type that we call the Immortal cell. But yeah, so this was the first one out of all of the others that he'd worked with. The first human cells in general, not just cancer, but human cells in general, to prove successful in vitro, so successful in growing basically in a lab condition.
Okay.
And so this was understandably complete breakthrough in scientific research. And after Henrietta's death, and when they started to understand more about how important these cells were, he freely donated these cells and tools he had developed to analyze these cells to other labs because he understood how important they could be for future medical research. So I think it's important to note he didn't directly profit off these cells.
This sounds like foreshadowing.
Yeah. So to get an idea of how important these cells are, in just the last 50 years of their use, they have generated over 60,000 peer-reviewed scientific articles.
Whoa!
Yeah.
Isn't that insane?
Yeah. That's a lot of articles.
It's a lot, and they're exponentially growing now. So I think it's something like 3,000 a month now have some type of relation to using HeLa cells in the research.
Wow.
And to put them in perspective of what they've helped us in humanity do, they were vital in the research of the polio vaccination. They have been researched extensively to try and understand cancer cells. They were used in the early research of AIDS and AIDS diagnosis and treatment. And of course, in genetics, they have been used. And even the wildest thing, they have been sent to space.
Oh my God!
Because in space, yeah. So in space, in microgravity, cells can either thrive or they cannot thrive when you take gravity away from them. And these are the type of cells that absolutely thrive. So it means that their cultures are able to grow much more rapidly, robustly in size, which is super interesting because so these are a type of cancer cell, obviously, and a type of immortal cell, so they don't die out easily.
Wow.
And some of the possible repercussions is that if humans go on long-term space flights, we will be exposed to more radiation. More radiation means that we can have more mutations in our cells, which can lead to cancer. And the problem is that if cancer cells are able to more robustly reproduce and survive in space, it could mean that humans are set for not a very well time in very distant space travel because our bodies would very much struggle to try to beat mutation and cancer cells. So I thought that was fascinating that it's gone from this young lady born in 1930 to all of a sudden her cells have even been sent to space. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, that's, I mean,
Yeah.
It's like, it's so difficult to place where my excitement or my disappointment are, because it's like, on one hand, that is incredible that her legacy is what it is, but on the other hand, it's like, this was all done without consent. So it's like, should the baseline be anger, or should the baseline be like, I think this is hard.
I feel the same way. Yeah. It is really hard because they've been so important in medical research. But as you said, super important that neither Henrietta or her family ever consented to this type of use of her cells.
Yeah.
And actually, this is wild, they didn't realize that they were even her cells until about 20 years later. So here's the next part of the roller coaster. So back then, obviously, there was no written verbal consent from family or Henrietta. And back then, there was no legal or ethical requirements in place around informed consent of patient treatment. So I think this is really important to note that they didn't legally or ethically have to, but they should have morally done it.
Yes,
but
right.
this is what has helped shape law in our current 21st century lives. So, in fact, back in the day, any material that was obtained through the treatment within a hospital, I don't know whether this was just Maryland state law, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was across many states. So any materials that were obtained through a treatment, the hospital was considered the property owner. And it was either the hospital or the physical physician, if they were a private physician, or the institution that it came from. So it's wild that the default was that they owned the material.
Oh my God.
Crazy. Yeah, you could literally chop off someone's limb at a hospital and that was yours to keep.
Yes. I own this now.
I own this now. Exactly. And so they were called HeLa cells because back in the day it was customary to name it after the first two letters of the patient's first name and last name. So that's why we've got Henrietta Lacks and HeLa. However, the names weren't necessarily propagated through with the research.
Oh, so you mean that some people didn't know?
No, lots of people didn't know that they were her cells. So it wasn't until 20 years later that people began to suspect who was the rightful owner of these cells. And it wasn't because the hospital said, these cells that have been breakthrough in, polio eradication came from this young lady. It was a leak. Someone had leaked the information to the public via written media to suggest that Henrietta was the rightful owner of these cells. And at the time, researchers denied it from Johns Hopkins. However, this was conclusively confirmed using DNA in just the last 10 and 20 years through different DNA methods.
Did people deny it up to 10 and 20 years ago?
No, I believe in the 70s and 80s, they agreed that they were most likely from Henrietta Lacks. Yeah. So as you can probably imagine, there's quite a lot of controversy around this, especially since for a long while after Henrietta's death, her family struggled financially because they had a few children. Their mother had died. They weren't able to seek medical care openly or really at all where they were living because, again, if you were black, you just couldn't be treated, or you could only be treated at exorbitantly expensive prices. And it's not like they got any special treatment from Johns Hopkins, so they were treated like anyone else. And a lot of this was because of, racist and discriminatory medical practices. Johns Hopkins Hospital, where Lacks received her treatment and had her tissue harvested, was the only hospital in the Baltimore area that offered treatment to black patients, and they could receive free care. However, the patients receiving free care had to do so in a segregated section of the hospital. And this is what I touched on before. They often become part of research studies without their knowledge. So they were just being used.
Yeah, that's what makes me land on the side of like, this is absolutely awful, especially because they were like poor and suffering. And so it's like, they could have at least received financial compensation for how incredibly influential and like seminal this
and so
sample is.
They had no access to her patient files after she died, and again, no say in who received the HeLa cells or what type of research they would be used for as well. But as you said, this is super important, and it did influence the establishment of many different sets of laws around informed medical consent, and especially research ethics. So if you're going to do research, where do you get your cells from, why, and who has consented? So just at the end of last year, so in the end of 2021, Henrietta Lacks' estate sued to get past and future payments for the alleged unauthorized and widely known sale of the HeLa cells by Thermo Fisher Scientific. So as I said at the beginning, the original researcher, George, had freely distributed them. However, they had become used as a monopoly by many different distribution centers for medical research. Because they could breed them and create them in bulk and then sell them to labs. And one of the worst ones was Thermo Fisher. And so they're suing them, and they've hired an attorney to try seek compensation for upwards of 100 different pharmaceutical companies that have not only used but completely profited off the use and the sale of HeLa cells. So that's where the story ends, but I hope that maybe we can have an update in the future to say if they've won that court case, because absolutely I think they deserve to be compensated.
Yeah, and I guess I also feel like, amazing that she has this kind of legacy, but she died so young. And it's like, if you asked me, would you rather like live a long, healthy life or like die young and leave behind a legacy? Like, fuck it, I'd rather live like a long life and be totally anonymous, So I do kind of feel bad. Like, I feel like when we consider, oh, look at this amazing legacy she left behind, look how much she helped science, it's like, yeah, but she fucking died at 32. Like, I don't, like, I wouldn't want that to be me.
Yeah. I agree with you that it's an amazing legacy, but it's like was completely unknown to her family that she had this legacy. I mean, I remember in the book reading that they had no idea. They didn't even like understand what it meant that they had HeLa cells.
Yes.
I mean, because to anyone, that's like, what does that actually mean? Like, is there? I remember one of her family members saying that, like, does that mean they have like pieces of her somewhere in a lab? Like, what does that mean exactly? And it's just really unfortunate that this had to happen. But like, I see the science part of it being amazing that we were able to get so many discoveries from it. But I like, it just hits you right in the stomach. That's like, this shouldn't be, like it shouldn't have, just get consent about this. And it just blows my mind. I'm so conflicted on this subject.
I agree. It is so simple to just get consent, like just to do it the right way.
I agree, because they had gotten consent for the first time they took cells. So why not for the additional times? I don't understand.
Very much.
And I think what's really sad
I
is that all of her children, her surviving children, because some of them died quite young, they would have been, middle-aged adults by the time that they had any idea that HeLa cells belonged to their mother and any of the impact that they've caused. And even then, it wasn't until most of her children would have been incredibly old, and it would have been on to the next generation after her children who would have provided DNA to help match back to HeLa cells. So it's crazy that it took that long to be able to confirm something that really should have just been in writing.
Yeah.
It has a dark side. Science really has a dark side.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, it really does.
Totally, especially medical science.
Yeah.
Bad.
Yeah, it's not great.
No. And even, I forget where in India, but there was a certain location in India, same thing, medical school, had all of these cadavers that they had been bought, air quotation marks, legally, but they hadn't. They'd basically been stolen or bought for pennies from families living in poverty, without the informed consent of what their loved ones would be used for. And this is all in the 20th century. Crazy. So it's happened, all over the world. This type of thing happens. Yeah. But that's me, and I'm now ready to learn about why we pie people in the face.
It's real, like, I know we say this pretty much every episode, but it's amazing that we end up in such different places from the same starting location. It's like yours went like so deep and historic and touching, and it's like, let's get as surface level stupid as possible. Then over to mine, over to the Lindsay corner.
Oh my god, I cannot wait to hear how you got to pie face. Like, how did you do that from the moon?
Jesus, how did I do that? I'm just clicking really fast through. Somehow I got into like some science talking about salt and iodine, which became seafood. Pretty typical. I was like hanging out in seafood for a little bit. The Clean Water Act popped up, and somehow from there I got into this weird Latin phrase, and from Latin phrase went into like ethanol fuel mixtures. Still not really. But from ethanol fuel mixtures, I got to Ford Model Ts, and from Ford Model Ts, I clicked on a actor that I like who will actually come up, because this is now right around where I got into pie in the face. I clicked on Stan Laurel. I don't know if you've ever heard of Laurel and Hardy.
Yes.
No. I feel like I have, but maybe.
You've heard of them, Sarah? I think is it Babes in Toyland that they did?
Well, they were back from like the golden age of cinema, weren't they?
Yeah, they do. They are like before. They are like the the comedy pair that kind of came before Abbott and Costello.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Laurel and Hardy is kind of where I got to, and from there ended up actually on this man named Fred Carno, who is also going to come up, and these two kind of got me to pieing. So I took an oddly scientific route to get there, and just very quickly ended up here.
That's amazing.
It's perfect.
It is perfect.
Yeah, unlike you guys, I have the discipline to leave the science around.
I want to be more like you.
It takes discipline to end up in pie in the face, but that's where we are.
That's where we are.
But I guess kind of like I alluded to with Laurel and Hardy, the tradition of pieing in the face, or the gag in which you pie somebody in the face, is over 100 years old. And I guess maybe that makes sense because right now we're in like the 2020s. So
Wow.
1920s-ish, yeah. If anybody is
Yeah.
unfamiliar, or you are listening from an area of the world where this is not a staple of comedy, a pie in the face is quite literally that you take some kind of cream pie, so there's no crust on top, and you throw it in somebody's face. And for whatever reason, which is why I was so interested in this article, this is a staple of particularly American comedy, but also British comedy. And I do think that it's kind of become a common enough image that it shows up in many cultures. I don't want to say all cultures, but I think a lot, at least in the maybe Western culture, it's extremely common.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's a familiar enough trope, I guess. So I wanted to know, particularly when I was reading this, my central fascination was, why did people find this so funny? Because I don't think it's funny. I'm just kind of hoping to have some kind of explanation. Or, why did this stick? Like, of all things, why is this something where it's like, and now there's a pie in the face? And,
Oh, you got it.
oh,
You're hoping the article gives you some epiphany where you're like,
oh,
I
and
get it.
I'm like, oh, that's so
Did it
fun.
give? And it didn't give you that epiphany.
I actually, in the way that, like when you look at a painting and you're like, I don't know why that's art. And then you like learn some art history and you're like, oh, now I get it. Like that.
Now I see it.
That's how I appreciate it. It's not now. It's not like I look at it now and I'm like, oh, that's so funny. It's more like, oh, no, I appreciate that sort of purpose, I guess. So actually, that's probably a great way to really introduce it. People who actually are, I don't want to say experts in humor, but kind of historically people who started what we refer to as like American comedy or American humor now, kind of saw this as the perfect way of walking the tightrope between harmlessness and humiliation.
Oh.
So nobody actually really gets hurt, but your pride is definitely wounded. You've literally got pie on your face. It's not like you trip over a bit of sidewalk and you recover. It's like you are now like filthy with pie.
Yeah.
So, like I said, want to do this with pie that does not have a crust over the top. And the reason I say this is because there is a dark side. Non-consensual pieing is punishable by law.
Ooh,
Yeah.
Whoa.
I had no idea.
I
Does
had
that
no
make
idea
sense?
either.
Because it's like you're trying to assault them, basically.
Yes. So, I will go into a little bit of the dark side of pieing. That is a section that I
yeah.
made sure to take notes. Yeah. But getting into kind of the history, pieing had first began in plays that were like on stage. So before really the era of movies or silent films, we first had pieing in the face in comedy sketches. And the first film that it appeared in was in 1909, a silent film called Mr. Flip. And this man was, according to the wiki article, Mr. Flip himself was taking liberties with a woman.
Oh, naughty Mr. Flip.
Yep. So Mr. Flip got a pie in the face for taking liberties with the woman. So you find it funny.
He deserves that.
For his efforts, he got a pie in the face.
So I had said that this is the first time it appeared in film, but like it had appeared on stage a little bit before that. And this guy Fred Carno, who I said was part of my sort of wiki path, he was a British man who during the 1890s was limited by law. So apparently in the 1890s, when it came to writing comedy or I guess stage performances in general, there was a heavy dose of censorship applied to the dialogue in the 1890s.
Oh, okay.
So he decided to instead rely on bodily humor or situational humor that is a little bit more acted out so that he could circumvent the whole like, I'm really limited in what I can say, so I'm just going to make people laugh by the way that they act, right? So he's the one who really started popularizing a pie in the face.
That makes sense.
Wow.
Trying to get around the red tape.
Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah, it kind of begins as a little bit of an act of rebellion. And what I thought was so cool about Fred Carno, like I said, he was this British guy. He was the sort of teacher, I guess as much as you really can be a teacher of comedy. His pupil was Charlie Chaplin.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
That's really cool.
That is so cool.
And Charlie Chaplin's little protege was Stan Laurel.
Oh, it's all coming together.
Wow, one big comedy family.
I was about to say, yeah, like a little comedy family tree. So these guys, the three of them, Fred Carno, Charlie Chaplin, and Stan Laurel, all kind of were the beginning of popularizing the sort of pie-in-the-face gag. But there were many, many other people who studied under Fred Carno, but I didn't recognize their names, so I'm not mentioning them because this is about what's interesting to me. This tradition made its way over to America rather quickly. In around 1913, somebody by the name of Mack Sennett, who was dubbed the King of Comedy, said, as a personal rule, a mother never gets hit with a custard pie. Mothers-in-law, yes, but mothers, never.
Mother-in-laws, yes. Mothers, no. Wow, I love the boundary.
No. That is the line. This is what's funny. This is what's not funny. Now we've got it. 1913, we've got the line in the sand. You do not pie a mother, but you do pie a mother-in-law. That is right.
But that's crazy because a mother-in-law is still a mother.
I know.
Because she obviously she birthed the person that you're married to to be a mother-in-law.
I definitely agree with you, Sarah. But this is the
like it's like a Venn diagram that like doesn't quite work.
yeah. It's like if this was a logic statement, your code would crash. Like
Yeah.
So this is really like turn of the century, I guess, is where this gag sort of comes from. That's where this humor comes about. And I thought these were really interesting little fun facts about it. So in 1927, there was a Laurel and Hardy film called The Battle of the Century. And I believe this holds some kind of world record. There was a fight with 3,000 pies.
Holy crap.
Wow.
That's a lot of pie.
It not only is it a lot of pie, because it was honestly hard for me to imagine like how many pies is 3,000 pies. I tried to look up modern day sort of like a Guinness Book of World Records for pie throwing contests or pie in the face, whatever. And there were a lot of like small town newspapers claiming that they broke it, but they were all in like the 2000s. So as far as I'm concerned, this is one of the largest pie fights I have seen on the internet, set in 1927.
I'm sure we could beat that now.
You really want to do that?
I mean, if we get a big enough audience size, hell yeah.
We could do a Go Ask Alice pie contest. That's it. What also kills me is that like back then they definitely didn't have the industrial level of like food production that we have now. So I'm just imagining like all of these like, you know, little old ladies baking individual pies for this like 3,000 pie fight.
Oh, the poor things. They would have put their heart and soul into it, and they were used to hit someone in the face.
I mean, maybe not. I'm sure.
I think you're sensationalizing that a little bit.
I love you. I love your compassion, Sarah. You're very kind. But I did find this is another interesting fun fact of massive scale pie. In 1965, there was a film called The Great Race, and this was the largest pie fight in cinematic history. It was a $200,000 scene that used 4,000 pies and a large cake. And my favorite part is it took 5 days to shoot.
Wow.
Can you imagine a 5-day long pie fight?
That's many hours of pie.
I want to see it.
Imagine waking up on like day 3 and you're like, oh.
Not again.
More pies.
Oh, God, it would feel like Groundhog Day.
You're like, I still have 2 more days of this shit. I'm sick of it. I guess nowadays, whenever we see a pie in the face gag executed, it's more about a call out to like, you know, an earlier time. It has a nostalgia or like a vintage feel to it in a way that doesn't feel modern, I think is what I'm trying to say. You know, when you see,
Yeah.
when you see a pie in the face, you're like, this is funny because it is old timey funny. This is not. There are no memes right now that are about pieing in the face. Part of what piqued my interest was contemporary pie throwing or pieing in the face and the ways that it's used. So modern day, the most common use, I would say, this isn't as per Wiki, this is as per Lindsay, a common use of pieing in the face is actually a form of political rebellion that people use against politicians and the wealthy.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
So there's a whole sort of subsection about political activism with pieing. So it really began, or it took off, I guess, as a means of expressing yourself in the 70s. And I think that this really comes back to what I was saying before about being a balance between harmlessness and humiliation. Because it's kind of like, what, are you really going to sue me over a pie in the face? Spoiler alert, like, yes, you can.
Yeah.
But it is, you know, it's a little bit less than a baseball bat to the face. You know, like, it's not...
Yeah.
But still humiliating.
It's, yeah, okay, that's... Yeah. But it all started in a very good place as far as I'm concerned. In the 70s, activists who were pro-gay rights and pro-legalization of marijuana, anti-war, anti-capitalism, they all took to pieing in the streets. So anarchists, for example, targeted the rich, famous, and pompous Bill Gates in 1998 on a trip to Brussels. And I thought this was hilariously a full circle for Lindsay because this event in 1998 inspired a video game that was available online where it's basically whack-a-mole, but instead of whacking instead of whacking a mole, you whack Bill Gates with a pie. And I don't remember what episode it was. I did talk about the history of whack-a-mole, which we also talked about in the last episode. I think whack-a-mole just is...
omnipresent.
Yeah, it exists everywhere in life.
It really does. But there is a activist group called they are anonymous Biotic Baking Brigade, and they pie conservative pundits like this woman named Ann Coulter, who I didn't know before, but she sucks.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, she's an absolute
familiar.
right crazy biatch.
Oh, fuck her.
Doesn't she have her own?
That's the best way to.
Doesn't she have her own talk show now as well?
Sure.
She was super duper pro Trumpy, pro manga.
Wait, manga? You mean MAGA?
MAGA. Oh, well, MAGA. I think we call it manga in Australia. MAGA.
Manga is like.
Oh, that's the Japanese
it's like,
cartoons.
Oh my
yes,
God.
yes. you just insulted half of our
I'm so
audience.
sorry. No, what do you call it? MAGA.
It stands for
MAGA,
Make America Great Again.
Yeah, whatever the stupid hats were.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
Are. They still are. They exist.
Oh, God. Yeah, I just Googled her latest. Oh, she's a nightmare. She's got books. Oh, I can't. Yeah. Anyway, did she get a pie in the face?
She was pied in the face by the Biotic Baking Brigade and later by Al Qaeda.
Al Qaeda.
Oh my gosh.
Also, the leader of the
amazing.
Westboro Baptist Church, named Fred Phelps, was also pied in the face by the Biotic Baking Brigade.
Yes. Yes.
Oh my God.
You know what I'm joining?
Al Qaeda.
Another group called the Antartists. Sorry, I wanted to get that right. So tart is in there on purpose.
Oh, yeah.
They are a Canadian satirical political group, so I guess a fake group of politicians or making fun of politicians in the late 90s and early 2K, targeted specifically political and cultural figures in need of public embarrassment, which I loved. And their leader, or maybe not leader, but a prominent member, goes by the name of Pope Tart.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
They specifically targeted the Canadian Prime Minister and Premier of Alberta for defending basically large companies' rights to pollute natural resources. So to me, the pieing guys are pieing the good fight, pieing the good pie.
Yeah, they're pieing the good pie.
Yeah. I support their pie behavior. It's good.
Yes, I heavily endorse it. I will get into the convictions just because I think
Oh dear.
I think it's funny that there are such heavy consequences for pieing. Like, give me a fucking break. I mean, this is the reality of politics, right? So the Alberta Premier, who I was... Do you say Premier or Premier?
Premier?
Well,
I don't
know Canadian politics.
Like the premier, we call it a premier, like the leader of the state here.
Premier?
Like if you break up your state, so it's
Can you say it like really slowly?
premier. But that's very Australian.
Premier. I don't know if I'm saying it with an Australian accent or if I'm saying it correctly. Premier.
I think I get what you mean.
Oh no!
Yeah, I get it.
Oh no! I'm gonna have to go to the apology corner again for all of these. Fuck. You guys, if anybody lives with governments that have this role in them, I'm really sorry. But also, if it makes you feel any better, it took me most of my childhood life to understand how to say governor correctly. So maybe it all evens out somewhere. So the pie, when I was just talking about the Alberta Premier,
I would say.
Of Canada. The Alberta Premier of Canada, I was just saying, was targeted by Antartists in 2007. So one of them, I guess, missed and it hit a security official instead, and that person got 30 days in prison. So not too bad.
Oof.
Wow. Okay, that's still a lot.
That is a lot for a rogue pie.
Another Alberta Premier, a different one in 2003, was hit by a pie. I think Canadians just love their pie throwing, but this also received 30 days in prison, and the specific, I almost said sentence, Jesus.
Whoa.
The legal diagnosis was assault.
Oh.
Okay,
Wow.
charged for assault. In 2010, PETA threw pies to protest Canadian seal hunting, and it was considered an act of terrorism.
What? Seal hunting should be considered an act of terrorism.
I'm with you. Amen. Rupert Murdoch in 2011 was... I don't remember this, and I really have no excuse, but there was apparently a phone hacking scandal that had many people very upset. So Rupert Murdoch was pied in the face, And the person who pied him also received 4 weeks in prison. So it sounds like if you're about to pie somebody of high profile in the face, prepare for about 4 weeks or 30 days of prison time in the U.S. and Canada.
Wow.
I saved the best for last, though. This is the most over-the-top consequences. A Spanish politician, Yolanda Barcina, was pied by the deputy mayor of Aruazu and 2 others who were protesting a high-speed rail line. Well, 1 person missed, 2 people hit. The person who missed got a year in prison.
Oh.
Whoa.
The 2 who did not miss got 2 years in prison.
Wow.
Whoa.
Jeez.
That's a long time in prison.
Yolanda claimed bodily harm that was suffered because of, quote, the hardness of a French meringue pie.
Oh, I can kind of understand if it wasn't a cream pie.
Do you all know what a French meringue pie looks like?
No. Is it rock hard? Let me Google it.
No.
French
A French meringue pie is basically
pie.
all cream.
Oh my god. It looks so soft.
It's well, she claimed bodily
If
harm.
anything, she got free dessert.
Well, there you have it. You should think very carefully about whether or not you want to pie a politician in the face, but almost always I will support you. And that's really the long and short history of pieing.
That is amazing. I really enjoyed that topic. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you guys so much for being so enthusiastic and so into it. It's so much more fun when I can make you guys laugh. So just thank you for really diving in with me.
You're so welcome.
So yeah, I ended up on the topic of antimicrobial resistance, or AMR for short. So as I always do,
Define the topic.
I will define my topic. It's a thing.
We love it.
So AMR is a process in which microbes evolve mechanisms to protect themselves from the antimicrobials. So it's very simple. It's, microbes being resistant to antimicrobials. That's it.
What's a microbe?
And then
This might be a dumb question, but is this
yes.
because in COVID days we've talked a lot about antimicrobial hand washers and even stainless steel plates on doors and stuff. Is that the same thing or is this a different?
Yes. Yeah. Well, this is
More general?
kind of a result of that a little bit, because this also I touch on antibiotic resistance mostly because that's a really big one.
I see.
So the antibiotic resistance is a subset of AMR that specifically applies to bacteria that become resistant to antibiotics. But, microbes could be anything from fungi to viruses to protozoa to bacteria. So it kind of covers, it's all of those things, but I think antibiotic resistance is kind of the big one that we're hitting on, that I wanted to hit on.
The poster child for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. It's super cool, but it's also super horrible. So I love this topic. Anyway.
Put that on a shirt. It's super horrible. I love it.
I love it.
I'm sorry, Drew.
Infections due to AMR cause millions of deaths.
You might want to start that sentence again. I'm
They cause
sorry.
millions.
Let him say the bad
my God.
sentence.
I'm sorry.
The bad sentence is incoming.
Yeah, start again.
So infections due to AMR cause millions of deaths each year because these types of infections are more difficult to actually treat.
There we
so
go.
that's kind of the big problem, is that they require higher doses of antimicrobial drugs or alternative medications that can be more toxic to the person that's being treated. So it's actually a really big issue, and the World Health Organization has called this a global crisis. So it's pretty big. And of course, when it comes to these, higher dosages or alternative medications, these approaches tend to be more expensive as well, which to us also has to be a consideration because, if you're footing the bill, it's kind of a problem. It's a big problem.
I love that that's how we make government care. It's not that millions of people are dying. It's costing us money.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that. We will definitely get to that. So on top of microbes that are resistant to certain antimicrobial medications, there are also microbes that are resistant to multiple different kinds, and these are called MDRs, or multi-drug resistant microbes. And they're super terrifying because those are the ones that when you get it, nothing can really treat you because they can't use a cocktail. You're kind of fucked is the long and short of it, which is kind of a problem. But that's and then there are also bacteria that are considered extensively drug resistant, or XDRs, and total drug resistant, or TDRs. And these are sometimes called superbugs that can be extremely dangerous when it comes to infections because we can't really treat these, which is a huge problem.
Yeah.
So when it comes to resistances, how does this actually arise? So resistances in bacteria can arise naturally through genetic mutation,
Oh my
or
God.
by one. Yeah. Wait, what?
Who's keeping time? How long has Drew been talking? Say it.
No, I'm literally not saying it. It arises from genetic mutation. That's it.
Genetic diversity.
No. I mean,
You wanted
to
to say it.
No, I didn't. There's literally no genetic diversity written in this.
Oh, I'm so proud. Drew's like, stop bullying me.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Drew. You meant it. It doesn't matter if it said
No,
it. You meant it.
I didn't mean it. I didn't even think about that. I just thought of genetic mutation. Just
Maybe
because
I'm not
genetic
even
is written in there.
thinking about genetic diversity right now.
I'm not. Mom, I'm not thinking about genetic diversity.
I'm not thinking about it right now. I'm not even thinking about it.
I'm not even thinking about it.
Well, I'm thinking about it.
Well,
Me too.
whose fault is that? Probably mine. Anyway. Anyway, genetic diversity. So, resistance can also arise, which is a super cool mechanism where one species of bacteria acquires resistance and then passes it to another species of bacteria, which is, as I said, it's super cool. And there's quite a few mechanisms for this to happen, but basically the bacterial genome is known as highly plastic or has high plasticity, meaning it is able to adapt very quickly by changing its DNA and gene expression. And, in humans, we don't have a very high plasticity because we don't really want to change too much. We want to be more of what we are. We don't want to have mutations all the time. We don't want to have all this, different gene expression. Kind of, but we don't really want to change too much. But bacteria, it's a very advantageous for it to be able to change super often. So it's very high plasticity. So that's just kind of cool about bacteria. I love bacteria. Bacteria is super cool. Anyway, but it's extremely bad for us because trying to treat bacterial infections just more difficult because of this. And then we also have the problem where resistance to antibiotics can also appear, as spontaneously as I said through these mutations, but it's also extended use of antibiotics seems to encourage selective mutations, which can render antibiotics ineffective. So basically, we're putting on selective pressure. This is just simple natural selection at its finest. We're applying a pressure to these bacteria, and because of that, they're responding by, once one bacteria becomes resistant to antibiotics and is able to survive, it doesn't have to compete with any other bacteria, and then boom, now you've got a huge colony of antibiotic-resistant bacteria that's, just taking over and being able to flourish.
Yeah.
So that's a problem, but so that's where we really get into the problem with antibiotic misuse, which, if you were to misuse antibiotics, then that can lead to antibiotic resistance being much more prevalent because, you should only be taking antibiotics when they're prescribed. You shouldn't be taking, antibiotics for random things that you think, might help. Oh, why don't I just take an antibiotic because I feel chest pain or something? You shouldn't be doing that because that's just, propagating this antibiotic resistance. And it's also suggested to do narrow spectrum antibiotics versus broad spectrum antibiotics, where you're more effectively and accurately targeting specific organisms. It's less likely to cause resistance as well as side effects. So that's just a good thing that we should be doing.
So can we pause? I have a question.
Yes.
So when you talk about like a targeted antibiotic,
Yes.
My impression of antibiotics was always that this is like a giant blanket sort of, not like a cure-all, but it's kind of like it's widespread enough in the number of things that it can address that
Yes.
I'm very shocked. This is the first time I'm hearing of like a targeted antibiotic. Is this new?
Yes. No. So antibiotics have I keep saying antibiotics. Antibiotics. Sorry.
It's kind of cool.
So antibiotics actually have very many different mechanisms that they work by. Some target cell walls. Some target the actual DNA. Some target all kinds of different things. So what you're doing is you're actually targeting something that you know specifically about the organism and saying, I want to attack that thing that I know about this organism. And so I'm going to use a specific antibiotic to attack that specific thing that I know about that organism. And that's the very narrow spectrum antibiotics, is saying, you know, I'm going to attack the cell wall because I know that this cell wall has a specific, like molecular makeup that I can target. So that's what the narrow spectrum would be, versus broad spectrum being, I'm just going to target a bunch of different things and it's going to, it's going to work, but, I'm going to flood with antibiotics that aren't really going to be too useful against this specific, organism. So that's the big difference.
It's kind of like shooting everything and just hoping that something sticks.
Yes. Mm-hmm. It's a shotgun approach versus like a sniper rifle approach. I hate using gun metaphors, but that's kind of what it is.
Yeah, well, so I think that makes sense, but is the strategy then to diversify specific approaches so that your body doesn't develop particular, it's not that your body's immune, but it's like to avoid the situation where the antibiotics no longer affect the bad things in your body? Is the strategy then to just use or diversify your specific antibiotics to prevent that situation? Okay.
Well, it's kind of that. We tend to, because there are definitely a lot of different organisms out there that are antibiotic resistant. We have things that are effective against them. When you get hit with antibiotic resistant bacteria in your system, where you just use different antibiotics on them that are effective, but if those stop being effective, then that's the problem. Where you're using a different cocktail this time, but it could be a more expensive cocktail that's much harder to create. But that's kind of the problem, is if those stop being effective, then you're royally screwed.
Right, it's like an arms race.
Bacteria. Exactly, that's exactly what it is. It's an arms race. It's a biological arms race.
Yeah. Ooh. Okay, that's so metal.
Yeah, that's why I fucking love bacteria, but they're horrible, but they're great. I love them. So for people who take these medications at home, education and proper use is essential. That's like the key point, is that, for everyday usage of antibiotics, we have to have some kind of education behind it. We have to not just like take them for no reason. It's, we really, really need to educate people, and we need to have them take it properly. So that's kind of the message to take home here, is that, we really need that. So rising drug resistance is caused by the use of antimicrobials in humans and other animals, and spread of resistance strains between the two of them. So, humans and animals, we're really connected. I mean, we eat them, we live with them, all kinds of things. So when you have that kind of connection, bacteria spreads between the two of us. And if animals were to get antibiotic resistant, animals that we use were to get antibiotic resistant bacteria in them, then that could be passed on to us. And then now we have an antibiotic resistant infection, which is just a huge problem. Well, I'm going to talk about some of the bacteria that I've worked with that was antibiotic resistant. And it's really cool, but it's also a little terrifying when you're holding a sample in your hand and it's antibiotic resistant, and that if it got in you, you'd be royally screwed.
Does your brain do the thing where it's like, eat it?
Yeah, I lick it. Like your brain just like lick
intrusive
that.
Thoughts. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my God, you're so right. Just rub it all over your body. Like
rub it. Yeah.
Do you have to wear like special PPE when you're working with it?
Not particularly. I kind of just we wore a face mask and gloves and then and goggles, and that was about it. And there's like it wasn't like a hazmat suit. It was just like, all right, like this is just what I normally wear. So
Wow.
it was something else. Anyway, it was really something else.
That is so cool.
So antimicrobial resistance is increasing globally due to increased prescription and dispersion of antibiotic drugs in developing countries especially. This is really bad. So that's, not that I'm blaming them, but that's just a source of a lot of the antibiotic resistant.
Do you think it's just
these developing countries?
A lack of education with the healthcare providers that are providing the prescriptions and not understanding what the larger ramifications could be if they overprescribe?
It's that, I would say a little bit, but more to the point, which we'll get to later, it's water. Water's the huge problem.
Oh, okay.
So water and not having proper sanitation, not having proper, infrastructure for water, that's a big problem. Even in the U.S., it's estimated that like 2.8 million people become infected with bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics. And
Holy crap.
This is like per year.
That's huge.
So there's a lot of people, and it said, what was it, 35,000 people die in the U.S. just from these antibiotic resistant bacteria, which is a huge problem. And one of the funny things that I found rather funny about the article was it was estimated that $55 billion in increased health cost and lost productivity was costed to the U.S. by these antibiotic resistant bacteria. And I found that very funny. Like the loss of productivity was just so funny to me. It was just like, oh man, we can't work. That's the worst thing in the world.
Yeah,
Not loss of life.
Loss of life. Who gives a shit about that? But increased productivity, you couldn't get it. So I just found that very funny. It's dystopian, but
yeah, dystopian's the right word. I like that for this.
But seriously, the World Health Organization has estimated that 350 million deaths could be caused by AMR by the year 2050 if we don't control it in some way. So this is just another ticking time bomb that we have going on for us. So, that's just great, isn't it? Just another ticking time bomb.
But I mean, from a numbers perspective, like it just kind of, if you took like a really far out approach and looked at just like how many humans we have on this planet and the diversity of, the fact that we can carry so many different diseases, or, those diseases have so many, opportunities to mutate. It's just like the opportunities that this bacteria has are just so vast that it's just kind of like, of course that's going to happen.
Yeah. That's kind of the problem, is you're dealing with it's, as you said, it's very apt to say it's like a biological arms race that you're dealing with, that people don't realize how big of a arms race is going on, but we're not actively developing more antibiotics because they're not very cost effective, because once you use them you're good, so it's not something that companies invest too much in. And even COVID-19, the pandemic, has been a real big issue with it, because antimicrobial research, like the antimicrobial resistant research, has gone down quite a bit because scientists were focusing on the current problem of COVID and not the future problem of resistance. So that was just like a rather interesting thing that I saw. There was just like, oh, well, COVID's even screwing that up. So
something not to add to the paranoia, but something that I kind of wondered in the back of my mind was, with COVID, so many more people are now using hand sanitizer and sanitizing surfaces. And so I did, from, again, a pure numbers perspective, wonder if we, in COVID prevention, were breeding stronger bacteria.
Yeah, that's kind of the problem, where, when it says, kills 99% of bacteria, well, that 1% of bacteria that's alive is now becoming a superbug that's just been able to infect that entire area that you just, bleached, or not bleached, but like, used hand sanitizer on, or whatever.
Right, that you sanitize.
Sanitizing. So it's a serious problem that we need to address, and I think so not so much doom and gloom anymore. I'm going to talk about how we're going to actually address this thing, because this is like a big thing.
Yeah.
Let's fix it.
How are we going to fix it? That's this next part. So the most effective thing that we can do to stop this crisis can be rather simple in nature. The first is just simply monitoring the duration of antibiotic treatment, which can just be based on the infection or other health problems that the person may have. So it's just simply looking at what you have with the antibiotics and saying, how long should this person have these? Should they have, like, how much treatment should they get? It's just a very basic, like, keep them so that they have enough antibiotics, but not too much that they have left over. And then, it's just stop treatment when it's no longer necessary and don't overprescribe. So that's just like the first baseline, very easy way we could do this. But then the second idea is actually monitoring and mapping, which is a much more involved process. Basically, this idea involves tracking antibiotic resistance and monitoring the progress of resistance throughout the world. And so you just be able to get a much more accurate idea of what's happening in the world just by this, just being able to assess where the drug resistance is happening and kind of getting an idea of like, how do we deal with this more? It's just like the monitoring mapping.
I want to be hopeful and believe that COVID has furthered or advanced this infrastructure so that this could be more possible or more plausible.
I would say so. Yeah, I could see that being definitely a thing. So COVID really made us aware of being in a pandemic, made you aware of how hygienic you were and how how much you took care of things that you didn't normally really consider that much, like washing your hands. But that's all good. For helping with resistance is, having proper sanitation, having proper hygiene. That's all good for this. So I think is COVID kind of hurt with the scientists being scientists. I always say that. It feels so funny as like, I'm a scientist too. But I'm a doctor too. No, doctor. Anyway, getting way off the rails here.
It's unlike you, Drew.
So, is it?
Kinda, actually, yeah. Compared to Lindsay and I.
So, the third idea of limiting drug resistance is simply limiting the use of antibiotics. So that's just like, another baseline thing that we can do. So this means using antibiotics when they're absolutely necessary. So it's not just like, I have a cold or something and give them antibiotics. Like that's not what we want to be doing. We want to be doing it like, I have this specific infection, give me antibiotics to help me, prevent this.
Yeah.
So, this means people would not be prescribed antibiotics when they're, when they wouldn't help. And basically, because a lot of people believe that antibiotics basically cure everything, and that's not true. They're very specifically targeted at one specific thing that they do, and they're very good at that. But they don't cure everything, so we can't look at them as a panacea and just hand them out. Because viruses don't get affected by antibiotics, so that's you shouldn't be taking antibiotics for COVID. So that's right. That's just baseline there. And then sort of like at the hospital level, this means giving out the right antibiotics at the right dose for the right duration. And, this is, of course, much more difficult than I just made it seem. Like, the right dose, so...
just simply know the answers.
Yeah, just know the answers. So I realize I've just kind of like basically told hospitals to just get better at get good at prescribing.
Hospitaling.
But...
just be better.
Just be better. But we have to prescribe antibiotics responsibly. We can't just be giving them out. And then at the farming level, which I found very interesting, I didn't even think about this at the farming level. It is established that the use of antibiotics in the animal industry can give rise to AMRs in bacteria found in animal food, or food animals, I should say. And this is, of course, is another reason not to eat animals, but I don't really want to get into that.
Also, I was literally thinking about how many antibiotics and hormones we give chickens.
Yeah, me too.
That's a big one. That's a big one. And, I didn't want to get into not eating animals, but it's better for the environment. It's better for antibiotics. It's better for a lot of things. So I'm such a hypocrite, but God, I just like burgers. God dang it.
You're going to be such a sad little britches the next time you eat chicken. You're going to sit down and be like, oh, man.
Oh, no. But another thing that I found very interesting about antibiotics in animals is that the antibiotics they use are deemed not clinically relevant. And so those are the ones that get used on animals. But it just feels like that's just
What
right.
does that mean?
So it just means that they're not clinically useful. They're not, they couldn't
humans.
be used in a hospital.
Oh,
Yeah, they would.
okay.
Yeah, exactly. They wouldn't be used in a hospital for humans. They're just they're antibiotics, yes, but they're not clinically useful.
Yeah.
But they can still easily produce antibiotic resistance within animals, and then that gets passed down the food chain to humans. So this, of course, has far-reaching impacts on human health. And so I just found...
Just because it doesn't affect human, bacteria that's harmful to humans doesn't mean that it's, safe. Because then you could have the
it's not
same
a good
exact
thing to have.
Right, you could have these resistant bacteria that then develop in chickens, for example, and then those bacteria get passed on to humans, even though it had nothing to do with really the antibiotics that you were using. It's just the fact that this bacteria was now developed.
Yep, exactly. That's the whole problem that we're running into with animals being heavily dosed with antibiotics, is that we're building these that are in our food. We're building up bacteria that could be very harmful to us that we just don't know about, or not that we don't know about it, but we just we're not thinking about it. So that's just I didn't even think about it. So I'm the pinnacle of science. What am I saying? At the level of general practitioners, one of the strategies for reducing resistance is just to better inform patients about the use of antibiotics, and just know that these drugs are not panaceas, and that you shouldn't be taking them for a respiratory tract infection or something like that. It's just for this very specific purpose. And then once again, we get to the idea of giving the right drug at the right dose at the right amount of time. But, that's an ideal situation. But, these general practitioners can also, before prescribing antibiotics, they can take cultures of the infection before the treatment, and that reduces the misuse of antibiotics, because then you can use a very targeted antibiotic on it versus using a general antibiotic. So that's just another way that we can reduce this resistance out there. And then at the individual level, people can just tackle resistance by taking the antibiotics when they're prescribed by their doctor, completing the full prescription, and then never sharing antibiotics, and just never using leftover prescriptions of antibiotics for treating other illnesses. We should only use them for what we need them for. You shouldn't I feel sick, I better pop some antibiotics.
Yes.
That doesn't help you.
My family has a tradition of doing that.
Oh no, of having the script and being
No.
like, oh, you're sick, here we go, here's an old script.
No,
We'll go
just
get-"
for some reason, we just stockpile antibiotics and just take them when we're sick.
Oh no.
Oh, no.
Send me to the fucking apology corner for antibiotics.
I think my family did that too when we were younger. If you had a prescription with a repeat on it, if you were getting sick or you had a chest infection or whatever, you'd just go get your antibiotics filled and start taking them. But this is back before they started educating about don't do that.
No, it makes sense. I feel sick. This stuff is meant to make me not feel sick. I'm going to take it. It just makes sense.
Especially back in the early 2000s where it was prescription, for almost anything you could get an antibiotic prescription. Crazy.
Yeah, really, you could. Yeah.
Crazy.
Well, it's a serious issue, and now I think we're much more cognizant of it. So it's good. We're learning.
Yeah,
but
I've been
hopefully
slapped on
we
the
didn't learn
wrist.
before it's too late. Yeah.
This is my slap
that's
on
your
the
slap.
wrist. Yeah.
Oh, I already gave you one.
All right. Thanks, Drew. I'll be better.
This is super informative. This makes me feel good for not eating meat.
Yeah.
An extra bonus. Good for the planet. And
there you go.
good for my microbes.
Yeah, exactly. Good for your microbes. Another super interesting topic, but we'll get into that. I'll probably get into that later. It's super cool. your bacterial fauna is super cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, so finally, water sanitation and hygiene need to be included in this list.
Okay, yes.
Because unsafe drinking water is the cause of many gastrointestinal diseases, which greatly increase the use of antibiotics. So to treat these gastrointestinal diseases, you have to use antibiotics. The problem with that is, as you start to increase the use of antibiotics, the amount of persistent infection diseases increases as well. So then you have to use further antibiotics to treat those persistent infections, and then that increases the amount of persistent infections. So now you have this deadly cycle that just diminishes the efficacy of antibiotics, just because improper infrastructure for water. Yeah. So that's the big thing is this is really bad.
That makes sense now. Why in developing places we see like this increased.
Yeah, the increased amount of these resistant bacteria. Yeah. And I think, I'm going to soapbox for a second, but I think as developed countries, we need to assist developing countries to establish good water infrastructure so that antibiotics don't need to be used in such high quantities. I mean, that's one of the reasons we should do that. But, to me, that's a very convincing reason because, at the end of the day, it's not just going to be their problem, it's going to be our problem soon enough.
I was going to say, if anything, COVID has taught us that we're all extremely connected.
Yeah.
And it's sad that a lot of, I would say, large scale political movements don't really take action unless it's a personal issue. People don't care until it affects them personally, which I mean, considering all of the things that are going on in the world, also kind of get it because it's I can only pay attention to the fire that's closest to my face. But I do think it is really important to recognize or to take away from the pandemic that we're in right now that we are all extremely connected and all of our policies there's only mutual benefit to gain when we help other people. I feel halfway through I realized how stupid that was to say because duh, everybody knows that.
No, it has to be said. I think it has to be said. Sometimes it really has to be said because I feel like people don't even look at that, don't even think about that at all. So it does have to be said.
Yeah, everybody use ResistBot and write to your politicians about water infrastructure.
There you go.
I'm laughing, but I'm serious.
No, that's useful. So anyway, I think antibiotics are super cool, and I want them to be effective in the future. And there is so much more to this wiki article than I could cover. I mean, there is just so much more to this. So if you really want an interesting read about serious antimicrobial resistance, it's great. It's a great article. So just go if you're interested, go for it.
Or this would be a good time to introduce the Discord.
Ooh, I'm into it.
Go ahead, Drew.
Hook, line, and sinker. We're creating a Discord so that you can talk to me because you can already talk to the other two, but you can't talk to me that well. So now you can talk to me through our Discord. It's going to be great. And I'm going to be able to show you different articles, and it's going to be super cool.
Okay, so we'll all be there.
We'll all be there.
No, they won't. They won't be there. They won't be there. Don't me.
We'll all be there, but just like you were saying, Drew, there's so much stuff you didn't get to talk about, and I'm sure that there are other than the three of us, tons of science and bio nerds out there. So to continue the conversation, might as well hop on over to the Discord.
Yeah, and we can talk, and we can little tip tap type to each other.
The link to that Discord will be on our Twitter, so I'll pin it for a while, I guess. Until it's just famous.
So I wanted to finish off with a quick side note, because I actually worked with some antibiotic-resistant bacteria when I was in college, and it was super cool because the professor handed us specifically P. aeruginosa, or Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and S. aureus. I forgot the S stands for. Staphylococcus aureus, that's the one.
Yeah, Staphylococcus.
And she told us that these are antibiotic-resistant, so don't mess up, but also just handed us these cultures, and was just so nonchalant about it. I was like, whoa, this feels so weird. Cause she I remember she just handed them to us and was just all right, don't mess up, but they're don't get these on you. We're like, okay. Thanks.
Aye, Captain. Away we go.
Aye, Captain. Away you go. And we tested them with different cocktails to see if we could actually get them to, respond to antibiotics. And we were able to, but, some things, they just didn't respond and just grew fine. So it was just really cool to see that in person. But, that was my little aside about deadly bacteria.
I'm so interested so Sarah and Drew, about each other's topics. Before each of you presented, like percentage wise, how much did you know about the other one's topic?
I would say I knew probably about 50% of what Sarah talked about because I read the book on it.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
I only know a little bit of Drew's topic. I remember vaguely learning about it, but it's awesome. It's fascinating. I had no idea that there were so many factors that went into creating, these super microbes that are resistant. Yeah. It's so cool.
It's so cool, but so terrifying at the same time. I love it.
Yeah.
Our biology is so cool.
Biology is awesome. Like, I think one of my favorite facts in the universe is that about 50% of our biological mass in our body is cells that are not human cells, like it's bacteria and other things that are vital to us. Yeah, if we didn't have them, we would be dead because like our gut flora and things like that, absolutely vital to us. And all of the different bacteria we have on our skin as well. But yeah, if we didn't have them, we would be not having a good time.
We contain multitudes.
We do.
Yes, we do.
We ourselves are our own little ecosystem. Isn't that sweet?
I think that's awesome.
Yeah, you're just traveling around. You are a universe to some of these microbes.
Oh,
I know.
My gut is perfect way to end it.
Perfect ending. Pee pee poo poo universe.
Pee pee poo poo universe. That's exactly what I was gonna say.
Bonk.
True.
Bonk.
Drew, one of us has to be normal at all times. You can't do
I don't think that's possible for me.
Be normal.
Oh my god.
You sound like my mom.
Oh, Drew.
Sorry, Mom. I love you.
We love you just the way you are, Drew.
Oh, thank you.
Do not change.
All right, my little universes, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. Though dark, was extra giggly. So I hope that you got your absolute fill of existential dread, bewilderment, excitement, and just pure curiosity. Come hang out with us on Discord. Like I said, we would love to meet you and hang out. We're scheming all kinds of devious channels to open and conversations to be had.
Yes.
Hang with us. Hang out with us. Hang out with us. Hang out with us on Twitter. Go Ask Alice Pod. TikTok is now Sarah.
Oh, yes. So I'm going to merge the Go Ask Alice TikTok with my own personal TikTok. So you can follow me at Sarah Webb Science on TikTok. And not only will you learn a lot of facts from this show, but you'll learn a lot of other random fun facts as well.
Yeah.
She can't help herself. She has a problem.
I have a problem. You can also come hang out with us on Instagram at Go Ask Alice Podcast. And you can answer the question of the week. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. All right, guys. We love you so much and keep being weird.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Round the house.
Round the house.
Ooh, round the house.
Around the house.
Round the house.
Singing around the house.
Around the house.
Around the house. Around the house.
I'm singing in the kitchen, round the house. Now we're in the bedroom, round the house.
I'm in the bathroom, around the house.
Around the house. Now we're in the living room, round the house.